It's the 7th day already of December 2021. Welcome, everyone. I hope you're doing well. A lot of people are not. So I got people moving back into the evacuation zone. What does that mean, Dana? I agree with you. Government raised the contamination standards to limit payments of relocation money. So the places they are opening are a huge amount of radiation. Japanese government agency compares radioactive material to an angry and agitated wife fighting with her husband. I've heard a lot of these, just like a banana and a potato chip, and walking in sunshine, and climbing a mountain, sleeping next to somebody, and peanut butter, and getting in a kayak, blah, 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 blah. Everything's meant to disarm you. In 75 years of these lies, they really didn't embellish much from the 50s and 60s propaganda. They just keep regurgitating it because it's very effective, right? You got to keep puking up that same narrative. No, it'll turn you into the Hulk and Spider-Man if you do get it on you, so don't worry about it, kids. What do you want for Christmas? I want a Spider-Man outfit. What do you want for Halloween? I want a Hulk outfit. Japan government agency compares radioactive material to an angry... Well, those people should be fired, obviously. Is this rocket scientist or something? And in Japan, it's legal to hang people, so hang them for murdering people that listen to them. Nuclear plant designer Tokyo suppressing information, a serious meltdown, is highly likely. Look at the date on that story, 2 days after, March the 13th, 2011. You know what they say about nuclear meltdowns? They're forever and ever. Up to 1 million sieverts per hour outside of reactor 1, and that's a reactor 1. So 1 million sieverts, if everybody on the planet ran through there for 20 seconds, everybody on the planet would die. If you took everybody from every planet you can find in the Milky Way, and they ran past that thing, saying it's like a banana, it's like a potato chip, it's like, and then they dropped dead, everybody on the planet. And all the animals too. And you can do that for millions of years. That's what 1 million sieverts would be like. So that was 100% meltdown, melt through. Lost fuel pools at the top of the buildings. The reactor cores are 800 tons. Chernobyl was 200. But Fukushima reactors were pure uranium plutonium. And reactor 3, which is that one right there, we'll get to in a second, was mixed oxide fuel. You had reactor 1, reactor 2 completely liquefied. I forgot to bring in a picture of reactor 2. Really, Dana? You forgot to bring in a picture. Hang on. Yeah, because I have a window there with about 1,000 depictions in it that I use regularly throughout the year. And so I can I can copy and paste at random from that pane. It's always available. Reactor 2, Dana, get it together. Don't you hate it when you don't get the picture? Bear with me, I'll try it again. I erred. How did that ever happen? Anyway, I might not even find that. It looks at this. Who knows anymore? One more time. I don't know why I can't find that. Not if I haven't got any pictures of it. I find everything but, okay. Reactor 2 stayed intact. My apologies. Reactor 2 stayed intact, and these reactors had around 60 atmospheric pressures, around 900 psi. And so when they blow, it's a complete damage. But one building did stay intact, reactor 2, and that went China syndrome. It burnt continuously for several days in the fuel pool. The fuel pool's usually got 40 years of reactor cores stored at them, and they put the reactor core, the fuel pool's at the top of the building. This is where they put the reactor cores, because they're still splitting the atom with no containment poisoning the planet. Reactor 3 was the same thing. They gutted it, and they ended up with that. These were originally 190-foot buildings. So they brought in this contraption there and pretended that they were on top of the building. Everything was hunky-dory in the fuel pool. The problem being is that the fuel pool's at the very top of the building, not the bottom of the building. And they got 4 decades of reactor cores. There's 800 tons here and 4 decades of the reactor cores there. And this one in particular was the mixed oxide fuel. This is 1 billion times worse than a normal meltdown. The emissions are lethally and toxicity. Plutonium will no longer be measured. Japanese government. Almost impossible to detect plutonium. Well, it's everywhere. It's going to all the reactors were loaded with. That's reactor 4. And again, the fuel pools were at the top of the buildings. They don't exist. So what they done to manipulate the population on this planet, the nuclear industry did, was they had this built off site. They brought it in with cranes and layered it with cranes. And then they had a media campaign worldwide. All the world's media participated in this.
Understanding is on.
Let me turn that down for you, but I'll talk you through this.
Understanding is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4.
So he's pretending he's at the fuel pool to the building to the left. And so do the rest of them. They all pretend. Now, there's many of them that done this. This just happens to be 4 of them I put together in a nice package for everybody. Okay, so reactor 1's gone, reactor 2's gone, reactor 3's gone, reactor 4's gone. And that the fuel pools, which is decades of reactor cores at the top of each building, there's 2 of them, they're gone. Now, they're only acknowledging a little bit of releases for the most part. Now, there was also a place on the site known as the Common Spent Fuel Pool, and allegedly had 6,375 spent fuel assemblies. But because you don't have a repository anywhere on the planet, let alone Japan, the majority of the older reactor cores that were movable are stored right there in that fuel pool. So there's 6 reactors on site. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, but we got a common spent fuel pool. That has its normal capacity is supposed to be around 10 million pounds, but you can stuff double that into it. And if you ain't got a repository, guess what? 6 reactors of fuel running for 4 decades got to go somewhere, and it ain't off the site. Okay, so they released pictures this year, and the reactors are redacted. This is reactor 3, or reactor 4 right here, and reactor 3 is behind me. And up there, we're going to zoom in on, is the common spent fuel pool with an absurd amount of assemblies, double that number. And the assemblies is around 1,800 pounds. They're 100 fuel rods that are 12 feet long and weigh 18 pounds each per assembly. I'll get out of the way for these little pictures, but we're going to go zoom in on the common spent fuel pool up there. Hello, 2Dnas. I know, I get it. Hang on. So why are the reactors and the common spent fuel pool redacted in these 2021 pictures? There were 736 of them released. Well, this is another recent official picture of the common spent fuel pool. But why is the building redacted? And for context, you see those containers up there? They're actually transport truck containers. TEPCO confirms the steam came up from underground at 5 sieverts per hour. So that's considered a lethal dose in that environment. That's a killer dose right away. Because it's cumulative. So after a few seconds, it's 10 sieverts an hour bioaccumulated. After a minute, you got hundreds of sieverts where that steam is to above the ground, right? Because the steam percolates all over the place because the conditions are right for you to see it, right? But it went on for several years. And so, I'm building you a picture. You got all these reactors. So you got reactor 1, 2, 3, and 4. Fuel pools are gone. I forgot one piece of that puzzle. Gee. The life of Dana. It's a terrible burden. Hang on. No evidence. If you don't get the evidence, then it's not true, see? That's how the industry works. Even though the evidence, everybody can look it up, you won't. What got done to us? Here we go. Got off easy. Let me see. I'll put that up on the big screen. The big screen is over there, Dana. So up in the corner is reactor 5 and 6 in the top center. And so look at the damage to the drums. Some of those drums don't even belong there. That's where they had the cash storage. That was underway. Because reactor 5 and 6 is quite a long ways away. Okay, and so look at reactor 5 is the closest one in the center. And 6 is the back one. So why is the pump house and reactor 6 redacted? So you had reactor 1, 2, 3, and 4. The reactor cores are definitely gone. And when you change fuel, you don't take all the reactor core out. So they melt down, right? You got to keep the water to them. So you have 1, 2, 3, and 4, 100% unequivocally. They are 100% meltdowns, and they either expelled the fuel rods or when China syndrome, which is where the steam comes in, right, in a few minutes. And then you had the common spent fuel pool is in high doubt because that was ground level, and we know how high the tsunami ran right over that thing. Okay, then you had reactors 5 and 6. So 5, they didn't redact it, but there, we got headlines showing that could have melted down, but let's say it didn't. So then we got reactor 6 that's redacted. Why would you? And now, okay, now at the top of each of the buildings are the fuel pools. So let's go small. Let's downplay it. Let's say there's 30 more reactor cores. That's the same thing as a reactor melting down. Whether it melts down why it's in the reactor melts down 100 years later. It's still a reactor core meltdown. It's still 800 tons per reactor core melting down. Dwarfs Chernobyl by thousands in capacity, because Chernobyl was mostly graphite, where these reactors are pure uranium, pure plutonium. But reactor 3, oh my, was the mixed oxide fuel reactor. So then, a lot of these reactors went China syndrome, which means they melted down into the earth. And what happens if it melts down to the earth? One of the emblematic signs will be the earth will split, terrifying cracks will appear, and lethal doses of radiation will come out of the ground. And the whole site will be one big lethal dose. Workers say the ground under the Fukushima plant is cracking and radioactive steam is coming up because the melted cores have removed out of the building. So 4.7 sieverts an hour of steam coming out is frightening. That's lethal doses. You can't be anywhere near it. But the video to the right is the steam at 40 times regular speed. And in 6 places, the steam they measure was 10 sieverts an hour. Now, the Geiger counter maxed out at 10 sieverts per hour. So what that means is you had to leave the site. Now, wherever that steam is landing and aggregating, you know how fog will cover your vehicle in dew, right? This is lethal dew. So that's why no nuclear scientists have ever went there. On top of that, the water that they're pouring over the reactor cores, some of it, a little tiny fraction of a percent that they pour over it, is sucked up and put in the tanks. Because the reactors normally need 4,500 tons a minute, 1 million gallons every minute. And so when they run away into a China syndrome at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, you can't put out that fire, right? You see, we all seen the videos of lava under the ocean, right? Because there's so much temperature. That's what made nuclear, because you're still splitting the atom, but it's in a runaway. It's consuming everything. That has to go somewhere, so it comes up as steam. But the water at 2 sieverts an hour, if you had a 5-gallon bucket of it, 20 liters of it, everybody that tried to pick it up died before they could get their hands on it. And if everybody on the planet tried to pick it up, everybody on the planet would have died. Now, if you put that into the tanks, you can't build another tank anywhere near it. So the fact that you see all these tanks means they're empty. The tanks are there to make you think that they didn't kill the Pacific Ocean. I have done research expeditions 4 to 5 months, year after year after year, to Alaska from British Columbia, Canada, doing species count, which, by the way, is criminal in every sense of the word, apparently. I've been just demonized and vilified and attacked and smeared ever since for dare going out and counting species. Apparently only universities are entitled to do that. But we want to go out and check ourselves, and the species are wiped out, and you can find that documentation at the nuclearproctologist.org. You see the before and after pictures right on the front page. Scroll down and click the pictures, they'll expand. To the left or right, you can change direction. So the idea of the tanks is to manipulate you into thinking that the Pacific Ocean is not killed. Now, if you did fill up the tanks, you can't get back on the site. Not only that, you can't build another tank there because you're talking about 1.4 million sieverts per tank. And the tanks would have to be 10, 12 feet thick to shield somebody.
Lewis!
The tanks...
Lewis! Mom! Mommy! Mama! Mama!
What?
Hi.
There's about 1,000 kinds of radioactive material released from Fukushima. So when you hear talk about tritium in the tanks, remember there's 1,000 fission products, and that in 2013 they had 1,000 tanks. Guess how many got today? 1,000 tanks. In 2014 they had 1,200 industrial tanks, large industrial tanks. 1,200. 2017 they had 900 tanks. In 2021, this year, they got 1,000 tanks. Do you really think they're filling up tanks? Is the government trying to contaminate every region of Japan by burning radioactive debris? If everyone is contaminated, in a relative sense, no one is. And 300 times more radiation released into the atmosphere. Wow. So, like, all the evidence I bring to the table doesn't mean nothing unless CNN tells it to you, or ABC tells it to you, or BBC tells it to you. But if I provide you with all the documentation, that's irrelevant, is what people are claiming. It's pretty impressive. 300 times more radiation released into the atmosphere from burning debris than claimed by the government. And that Fukushima plant will burn radioactive waste. The incinerators run around the clock. So they built a big brand new one recently, right? Right on the site. Right behind the sorting section for contamination. These are dirty bombs we're talking about. At 100,000 becquerels a kilogram, they're only talking about gamma. They're not talking about alpha or beta or neutrons. Is government trying to contaminate every region of Japan by burning radioactive debris? 100%, right? Japan professor was arrested was extremely unjust. Genetic passports for major populations. It has deformed their genes. Twins attached by organs grown outside the body. One eye cyclops babies with giant heads. They respond to people around them. Belarus and Ukraine is full of orphanages of children like that from Chernobyl. Hundreds ill after Fukushima radiation nuclear plant rubble burnt in major... So they grind it up and takes it to different cities and burn it in incinerators. So hundreds of people got sick. That's permanent when it comes to radiation. Suffering nosebleeds, eye, throat, and skin. Government claimed radiation levels were low enough to be safe. Well, if it was low enough to be safe, you wouldn't truck it all the way to another city. High temperature incinerators building on site at Fukushima Daiichi. There is no safe level, by the way, from a nuclear meltdowns or from radiation in general. Across from incineration workshop. They got an incinerating workshop at Fukushima with an incinerator across from them. My goodness. We are basically recreating Fukushima all over again because clouds of these dirty bombs continue across the Pacific Northwest, right? Japan is burning Fukushima debris 10 miles from the nuke site. So does this sound like a place you want to move back to? They've done everything they could to kill the country. Radioactive ash at 70,000 becquerels a kilogram found near Tokyo. This is from the incinerators. At 70,000, these are dirty bombs of ash left over from the incinerators. You're liberating them to the environment. You can't destroy it by incinerating it. And that there is no such thing as a safe level of radiation, that the standards are based on benefits. Inhaling the particles increases radiation exposure by a factor of a trillion because it pulses energy it's like a balloon blows up, I would say, full of whipping cream. And the whipping cream went in every single direction. There was nothing spared. Well, that's what radiation does at the speed of light. So it has an enormous amount of energy every second for very long periods of times. And no matter how small the emissions are, like distance-wise, because some of it can emit up to 50 feet away, very high energetic curium and plutonium, after it's gone through a chain reaction, has... So even, say, like tritium, which doesn't emit very far, but there's an absurd amount of it created as a byproduct, which is radioactive water, it still pulses at the speed of light. So it still wrecks your DNA and your chromosomes. It's still under... Your body goes under siege from the white blood cells, attacking that for the rest of your life. Like you cut your finger, your white blood cells will attack it for 6-7 days till it heals, right? And then your red blood cell count will come back up. All the radiation you get in your body, you're under siege trying to build a tumor around it for the next couple of decades, which means you have less red blood cells carrying oxygen and nutrition throughout your body, which means your immune system is compromised. And so inhaling it in your body sequesters your muscles, your organs, and your bones. It's a big part of the equation, trying to wrap your mind around that. Then that was the answer for you. 100,000 becquerels per kilogram, 1 billion pounds. We're talking about 16 billion dirty bombs at 100,000 becquerels a kilogram. So 16 billion times 100,000. And you're only talking gamma. They're not talking about alpha or beta or neutrons. A family had 5 pets die within a couple of hours. That's radioactive fallout. See, carbon emissions are not going to do that. Gas emissions are not going to do that. Oil emissions, carbon is not going to kill all your dogs. Japan's secret promise with the U.S. to burn plutonium. What the hell is that all about, I wonder? Fukushima plant will burn radioactive waste in the incinerators to run around the clock. They got the homeless are given paper suits. They're burnt at the end of the day too. Burning debris from Fukushima. So this is a map of Japan where they're exporting the radiation all over the country and burning it. This map is not complete by any shape or form. That's absurd. Now, if just imagine you had a nuclear accident and you're a nuclear power company, you have a nuclear accident, and your government exports it to all the incinerators and they're supposed to burn it and radiate the communities even worse. Does that make any sense to anybody? Is there anybody on our planet can wrap their mind around that? But where's the logic? Like, it's just like there's so many wrongs about this whole story. Yet they'll go around and do stuff like that. And then they spend 12 million on Twitter to censor Twitter because no people are going to be speaking out about it. So they know it's wrong, right? That's spending that kind of money, which is about 50,000 US, spending that kind of money to censor people that are trying to have a conversation about it on Twitter. You think Twitter's going to give up that kind of money? All they got to do is censor a couple of people's accounts. You know, you lost the planet now because you didn't rein it in. Today's incineration of the Fukushima debris continues in 19 locations in Fukushima Prefecture. No, they're shipping it all across the country. It's not just Fukushima Prefecture, but there's 19 spots in Fukushima Prefecture where they're burning debris. Air samples in Tokyo at 270 times. So you were supposed to abandon Tokyo because these are absurd numbers we're talking about because they're only acknowledging gamma. So you want to multiply it by about 600 to get the true numbers. And some of that's coming up. Fukushima release is so great, the radioactive aerosols in Washington were 100,000 times normal, but in Tokyo they were only 270 times worse than global weapons fallout peak, which was not normal. That was a nuclear war, because it's the same weapons with the same radioactive fallout. Instead of shooting at each other, they just blew it up in their own countries. Okay, we got enough radiation for our countries. We're going to stop atmospheric weapons testing. 6,000 becquerels a kilogram of cesium-137 in mushrooms from Bulgaria. Which is not a big surprise when you see these numbers in Washington, right? Nowhere is safe. Cesium levels in Yokohama mushrooms reach 3,000 becquerels a kilogram. Now, they're always, cesium is a gamma. And you're not acknowledging that the reactors, the biggest byproduct of the reactors are curium isotopes. And curium isotopes, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. Because once it goes through a chain reaction, it's a whole different monster. So the emissions we're talking about are 1 billion times more poisonous than industrial poison. That's the consensus anyway. Already eaten by hundreds of children under 12. Because they hate children. The nuclear industry hates children, hates insects, hates birds, hates mammals, hates animals, and despises humans. It's an incredible death cult, absurd death cult, which brings us to the poll tonight. Dana? La 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 la. Where's the poll to? Dana, bring it up, boy. Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's doing good. Should pro-nuclear power be labeled a death cult? Yes. And somebody said no for some reason, but 94% of the people say pro-nuclear power should be labeled a death cult. Everybody that's pro-nuclear, basically. Look at this headline here. So instead of evacuating the children, devious universities, nuclear universities, gave them dosimeters that they can't read. They can't read those meters. They're not meters. Therefore, universities have to interpret them. And he gave it to something like 90,000 children in that area, rather than evacuate them, of course. As you'll see coming up, Fukushima kids return homes to homeschool 6 years after. This is 2017. So the little toddlers are being welcomed back into a nuclear wasteland. And the media puts it up on a pedestal as if it's a good thing. In Minima Soma, where you have 10 to 20 million becquerels, atomic decays every second of dirty bombs per kilogram. It's just ludicrous. And even in 1,000 years, it still won't be considered acceptable. Every generation ahead of us are going to hate our guts for not doing something about it. And so it was tough times. I get that. I'm not pretending it wasn't. And I was heartbroken. I remember vividly, I was heartbroken that tsunami was taking place. I got it. I knew this wasn't your tsunami. This was a tsunami, baby. This was unprecedented, historical in our lifetime. And in the day of mass media, we were, all of us, I'm sure, were awestruck with just the carnage and the power. 600 mile per hour wave coming at your coastline, one after another. Researchers too frightened to get closer than 100 kilometers from the meltdowns after seeing radiation levels. Indeed. In fact, they ran away from that place, didn't they? Radioactive rain caused 130 schools to close in Korea, which should have been worldwide. That's one of the models of the radioactive fallout. That's only 20 days of radioactive fallout. 19 days, actually. Nuclear fallout will engulf Taiwan. People should stay home and immediately take off their clothing. Now, we never heard that in Canada or the United States, did we? They didn't close the schools like they did in South Korea and Taiwan. Medical experts, Japan's safety standards and radiation levels for children are unconscionable. Experts find 45 microsieverts an hour near a school. That's 90 times higher than Chernobyl. And so the poor children, you can imagine, just experiencing that will go with them for the rest of their lives. But to be caught up in a nuclear wasteland and have the nuclear industry now designate you as a scientific experiment, nursery school Geiger counter nearly off the scale, because what's a nursery school child going to say to a nuclear scientist, right? Nothing. That's why they use them for lab rats, as they know they won't come looking for revenge. Nearly off the scale near play equipment. Topsoil has already been replaced. If you got to replace the topsoil because of radioactive fallout at a nursery school, and you're still going to let the children go in there, you should be arrested. And it's absurd to do this to children. Replace the topsoil and send them back in. So this was their incredibly terrible evacuation zone. 80 kilometers for Canada, US, and Australia recommendation. Less than 30 kilometers, stay indoors. That's like giving you the finger. That's like, stay indoors, breathe it in, die. You can't run anyway, there's too much radiation. You're going to die anyway in the near future. I actually seen comments on the story today where they said about people who were moving back, well, you're going to die anyway. Yeah, but not of 25 different tumors. You move back in there, that's what you're going to die of, 25 different tumors. 20 kilometers. Now, this absurd amount of communities that are supposed to be incredible numbers, we've covered many, many times, and they didn't want to move them because you got to pay them, see? Government answer to protect children of Fukushima radioactive fallout, wear long sleeve shirts. Well, it's not the government's answer, it's the nuclear industry's answer. The Worldwide Nuclear Association is calling all the shots, right? The biggest lobbyist, nuclear lobbying group on the planet. It is an unbelievably power group. 60 million of these bags picked up to trick people into going back. And these are nuclear, like the place that we're talking, I got links below the video, the place we're talking about that they're moving into, they can't cross the street because it's too radioactive. They actually can't go out and play frisbee or something like that because there's nowhere to go. You can stay in your new house. It's absurd. The whole story is absurd. You can't build a house without it being radioactive. Hard to imagine something more frightening than 5-year-olds marching off to the irradiated school playgrounds with the Geiger counters strapped to their chest. The only thing more frightening, of course, than that is that they didn't evacuate them. In one community, they put up 3,000 of these fake Geiger counters. We know they're fake because the community is surrounded by these bags, millions of bags. And so you can't get rid of it because it's still melting down. And it's just a lethal thing to do to, and particularly what you see tonight is how heartless they are towards the kids. If they're that heartless towards the kids, then they're no longer a society, right? They got brain damage and they're actually no longer a society. You can't consider Japan's infrastructure responsible anymore. It's now gone apartheid on their own citizens. Parts of the school playground declared off limits. That's where you got to get out of that playground. You can't use that playground. You can't say, don't go over there, Timmy, to the toddler. The toddler like, yeah, I go over there. Parts of playground declared off limit with 0.25 microsieverts. Remember that number. 200 kilometers southeast of Fukushima. The children and the staff got to wear hats and gargle regularly because their school is a big had a big dirty bomb go off there of nuclear. So rather than evacuate them, so if terrorist blows up a dirty bomb in your community, at your school, should the children still go to school, just not play in that part of the playgrounds where it's really high doses? This is craziness. This is absurdness. And they'll tell you, well, you can't, the kids can play by the swing, but they can't play over here. Very, very hot. 27,000 becquerels per kilogram, multiplied by 68 to get a square meter, a cubic or a square meter. And they're only talking about gamma, they're not talking about beta or alpha or neutrons. 27,000 becquerels a kilogram cesium kindergarten near the west coast of Japan, 200 kilometers from the Meltdowns. These are absurd numbers, by the way. University radiation test finds 56.9 microsieverts an hour at the elementary schools. Drains, 20.8 at the governments, and 20 times higher than the official numbers. 56.9 microsieverts, brutal numbers, remember that. This is a picture that shouldn't exist, see? Children should not be walking past Geiger counters. Tokyo tea leaves of 27,000 becquerels a kilogram were picked by elementary school students. Again, they're only talking about cesium, they're only talking about gamma, and that's all these Geiger counters. Instead of measuring becquerels, for starters, they're doing it in unisievers. Unisievers, tea leaves are in becquerels, which is atoms pulsing energy every second. This is, unisievers, microsievers, millisievers is more about being close in proximity to fuel in storage, say, right? Former Prime Minister, governments worsened the radiation exposure. Says thyroid cancer expected in children from Fukushima nearby prefectures. Playground staircases radiation 70,000 times the maximum allowed, far from the evacuation zones, equal to 69 millisieverts per year. So the school playground is 69,000 microsieverts. Not unisievers, but microsieverts. But all the Geiger counters and all the community only showing you unisievers, right? That's all they ever show you on these things. They're all in unisievers. And that's in hard print too, see that? So there's no mistake in it. Right, see, unisievers is actually in hard print. So, what are we to? 69 millisieverts is incredible discrepancy from their versions, yeah? 75% of Fukushima, 300,000 children going to school so contaminated they would be radiation control areas at nuclear power plants. You can't find any in the kids though. They checked and they checked and they checked. I didn't know about nuclear disaster until April, said a Fukushima child. Small kids are playing outside. They were even playing with the radioactive snow when it was happening. The garbage facilities at 350 becquerels a kilogram, stuff people thrown away from their homes. The sewage plants, the excrements are radioactive. The slag, which is sewage, is radioactive. Like when you're excreting 170,000 becquerels a kilogram, they're going to be talking about gamma only. They're not going to acknowledge the beta or neutrons or alphas. These are incredible numbers that we're missing here from this equation. Tokyo government finds iodine-131 levels up to quadruple cesium. Again, the word cesium. For every cesium-137 that they talk about, there's 100 times more strontium-90. Tokyo government finds iodine-131 levels up to quadruple the cesium levels in the water reclamation centers. So, like when your water filtration system is so radioactive you can't even get rid of it in the local landfills because it's nuclear waste, imagine what's you're bioaccumulating in everybody's bodies, see? 100 becquerels a kilogram of cesium is nuclear waste. After 100 becquerels a kilogram of cesium is safe to eat. But there's 1,000 other fission products you're supposed to have in this equation. You can't just look for cesium. which is exactly what they've done to the entire population of the planet. And they've been doing it for 75 years. They can't just switch this off. That's the lie, and they got no choice but to stick to it. It's 75 years of regurgitating the same lies. 50 becquerels a kilogram, by the way, in humans lead to irreversible lesions in the vital organs, which means you now have a compromised immune system because your immune system has to deal with all your organs, and the lesions are active. What that means is your body's producing white blood cells constantly for it, and so you're fatigued and you're lethargic. Your children and everybody else that are exposed to this stuff. In Tokyo, neighbors cesium approaching levels found in Fukushima. Chiba incinerator dust, like this is right next door to Tokyo, at 70,000 becquerels a kilogram. Multiply it by 64 to get a square meter, and then multiply that by, oh shit, is what was incinerated, released into the environment. It's just a terrible, 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 horrific place to move back to, yeah? Billions of pieces of Fukushima nuclear fuel have spread pretty much everywhere. It's frightening, and wherever there's cesium, there's plutonium. And the atomic bomb had 1 pound of uranium. Fukushima had hundreds of tons. In fact, the Fukushima reactors had the 4 reactors total, and the fuel pools would have been around 24,000 pounds of plutonium, according to the math that I've been doing anyway, and that being based on their numbers is what I'm talking about. Fukushima had hundreds of tons. Well, each reactor was 800 tons for a reactor core for the boiling water pressured reactors. And then you got decades of reactor cores stored at the top of the buildings in 2 fuel pools that, because they don't have a repository anywhere on the planet. 6 in 10 Fukushima children tested of diabetes. You really want to move back into that place? Oh, by the way, they're expecting diabetes in children from the radiation. Children's health problems increasing: incurable stomach aches, chest pains, nosebleeds, diarrheas. 13,646 children out of 40,000 have thyroid tumors. Pre-Fukushima was 1 to 2 per million. This is absurd numbers, by the way. By the way, Fukushima girls have 3 times more thyroid cyst tumors, and also 79% more medium-sized tumors than boys. That's why we have to protect the women population and the females of all the species immediately. Too sweet. Thyroid abnormalities: 55% of Fukushima girls tested 11 to age 15. Thyroid cancer risk, by the way, lasts the entire lifetime after exposures. Radiation and health specialists: children with 11 becquerels a kilogram of cesium start to see heart problems and irreversible heart damage for children with 50 becquerels a kilogram. So eating this is not an option, right? There is no safe limit. And when radioactive cesium enters the body, 75% lodges in the muscle tissue, including the heart. And cesium-137 immediately damages the heart muscle. It's not slow acting. There's one community there in a single month period. There was an excess. I can't even remember the number for some reason. I shouldn't say it if I can't remember, right? There's 14,000 or something like that extra heart attacks in a single month compared to any other year. And it wasn't just 1 month of it. 43% of kids have thyroid abnormalities in new Fukushima city test results. Yellow rain. Now, it was snowing when this was happening in March in Japan. And they tried to blame the radioactive fallout and called it pollen. It's not pollen because it was snowing, right? We've seen the videos ourselves. Home stores selling radioactive cement. So moving back into the wasteland, or even outside the wasteland, is a huge... There's no way to avoid it. You're not invisible. You're not immune to radiation, even though you might think you are. You are not. Japan researchers: problems here to stay. Each rain will bring cesium into the neighborhood. Of course, there's 1,000 fission products you're worried about besides cesium. Highly radioactive glass rained on Tokyo. You're not going to get this on your Geiger counters. With 500 trillion becquerels a kilogram. Changes everything. 500 becquerels a kilogram. That could have been a sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs. Radioactive iodine found in Gunma at 3 sewage plants. So when you're excreting it all over the country, and they are, hot spots found in large numbers near Tokyo. Government alarmed by unexpected population drop after Fukushima. Gee, what could have caused that, I wonder? There was 1 million extra cancers by 2012. Well, it was 860,000 extra cancers. But cancer is just one of 1,800 illnesses. Child's risk of cancer from radiation is 10 to 100 times higher than an adult who had the same exposures. Radiation forecast withheld by the government. You paid them, you gave them the authority, the monetary, the equipment, and when it finally happened, it's like, no, we're not releasing it. Releasing it would cause unnecessary panics. So they decided such data would be unavailable due to loss of power. So remember when we talked about people who evacuated? You'd think people actually left there because this is a problem with nuclear power. This way you got sirens. You got to run. You can't wait. And then when people say, well, we're going to lose power, we won't have a job, and we won't have a pension, and they make that kind of decision, it keeps everybody there, and then eventually you got to go anyway because you can't deny the numbers, hopefully. Japan government gave speedy radiation forecast to U.S. military, but not their own citizens, who eventually had to evacuate and leave everything behind. Japan's government withheld radiation forecast to prevent causing panic. Yeah, and then they grew food there, They never stopped growing food there, pretend they tested it, and then they shipped it worldwide. It's 850 million pounds of rice each year in the Fukushima food basket. They just kept growing it and pretend that it was safe. In fact, they gave farmers shitty Geiger counters and said, check it yourself, and if you get more than 500 becquerels a kilogram, mix it with rice that's not radioactive, or don't sell it. You got to get the number below 500 becquerels a kilogram. The Geiger counters were garbage, and the farmer didn't know what he was doing. Remember back in the day, way back. Danger reading in Tokyo, radiation area levels that triggers an evacuation. 17 times the recommended limit. More contaminated areas in exclusion zone. And so keeping these children there, that's crimes against humanity. Radiation forecast can by no means, but that's the nuclear, bizarre, twisted nuclear death cult itself, right? Radiation forecast can by no means be released to the public. Showed a radioactive cloud spread over Tokyo, and then he went around reassuring the kids they're all okay. No, honey, your child is okay. Radiation forecast in Japan kept secret to avoid panic in the whole of society. And the whole of society should have panicked. You were supposed to panic. That's why you got sirens around nuclear power plants. You can panic. What way's the wind blowing? Get run into the wind, as long as it's not where the reactors is to. Run now. You know why people leave everything behind? Because you start breathing this stuff in. It's just, to go back home and park it because you're getting a nasty dose. The big dose right away is a lethal, horrific dose. And that dose is worldwide. That's worldwide, right? That was the Xenon 133, but there's 1,000 other fission products you're worried about. Fukushima medical care provider, hospital president says people will be healthier after radiation exposure from triple meltdowns. Because they're insane, right? They're actually insane. This stuff makes you insane. Well, what's insane is they're shipping food worldwide. They claim they're checking for gamma, but they're not checking for anything else. And the whole world participated in this. Every meeting, what I mean by that was all the universities, all the medias worldwide have now came on board with this genocide, omnicide, ecocide operation called nuclear death cult. Officials sharply raised radiation levels for residents to get iodate pills after the meltdown, 75 times higher than the crazies recommend for children. Well, the reason I say that is because the World Health Organization is the United Nations, which is just a corporation known as the New World Order, according to George Bush Sr. And the evidence, of course. So when officials, these so-called officials, this nuclear industry, sharply raises the radiation levels for residents to get iodine pills after meltdowns to 75 times higher than it was previously, there should be some public policy to stop that, shouldn't it? And this should be a crime. There's no reason to grow food there. If it was safe, they wouldn't have dressed like that, you know? Authorities hid the radioactive plume forecast to avoid evacuation, and it's akin to murder. It is murder. And then the kids go to work in school every day, and they drive past millions of these bags. There was 150,000 sites like this that we knew about, they say 4 years ago, that they admitted to. Government hid radiation simulation because it was bad. Serious contamination over a big area. And just endless pictures of children being checked for radiation so they can go home and say, no compensation for you. U.S. government kept worst case Fukushima scenario secret from the public. Possibilities of radiation exceeding safe levels for thyroid doses in Alaska. And some of the numbers were sievert to the thyroid dose for children in Alaska. And the ultimate betrayal is people like Shinzo Abe, a despicable sack of excrement. Outbreak of cancer is now underway in Fukushima. Clear evidence of an epidemic, cancer epidemic, which is what you would expect from a nuclear meltdown. Situation in Fukushima is beyond imagination, is correct. And young and old people dead from heart attacks. Yeah, because they put the evacuees in these little boxes with vending machines that sing "Don't Give Up on Fukushima, Baby." U.S. agency serious long-term health effects posed by 10 millisieverts, 10,000 microsieverts of ionizing radiation. Greatly increases chance of leukemia, organ damages, cancers, when adding ingestions of radionuclides. There's heart problems, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. These Geiger counters and unisievers, there's 3,000 in one community. That blows me away that they would do that in unisievers. Why wouldn't you do it in counts per minute? 70% of the children tested in Kanto, a region that includes Tokyo, had radioactive cesium in their urine. Well, they're not checking for plutonium or uranium or americium or neptunium. Tokyo drinking water is unsafe for infants, and the government was distributing bottled water in Tokyo. Metropolitan Tokyo is 36 million people. And you're delivering bottled water for 36 million population to their babies. You can't drink that water ever again. Your pipes are radioactive, right? Your faucets and your water reclamation facilities that are filtering the sediment are radioactive. 50 becquerels a kilogram in adults lead to irreversible lesions in your vital organs. You don't want to eat anything from Japan. Sorry, Japan, but don't be murdering the planet, for goodness sakes. Like if my Geiger counter went 29 million becquerels a square meter, that's heart attack stuff, right? Which you can, like these kind of numbers, you can see why there's 7 people dropped dead on a single street in 1 year in Fukushima Prefecture. 80% of residents tested of radioactive iodine in the thyroids, up to 87,000 microsieverts. 87,000 microsieverts. there any time about gamma? Iodine. Already hearing reports of kids suffering heart attacks. There's over 300 police officers have dropped dead in the exclusion zone that were guarding the exclusion zones. Already hearing reports of kids suffering heart attacks. Beware of the deadly cardiac problems in children caused by Fukushima radiation. I know there was 2 children dropped dead in one day in a school. 5 hospitals refused to provide medical care to the children. That's right, there's this complete detachment from the victims, you know. They know they're victims, so they just don't want nothing doing. Oh, I can't help you. 1 million becquerels a kilogram of just gamma detected at the Fukushima school, which means there's 10 million beta and 30 million alpha. It's absurd. And it's obvious they'll just leave it there. After decontamination, 1 million becquerels a kilogram, which is 68 million becquerels, the spot where your kid stands up the size of your dinner table. 68 million becquerels. They're going to pick up the soil and put it in their mouth. They're going to play in it. And so why not evacuate those children? Why send them back to class? How do you get that heartless? How do you get that soulless? How does that actually work, I wonder? No, Timmy's okay. Get him back in the classroom. We need him to work at Fukushima in 20 years. University of Pittsburgh radiation expert. Child cancer risk doubles, by the way, if you're exposed to a couple of x-rays worth of radiation during pregnancies. Children living near nuclear plants have double leukemias, higher incidences of solid cancers. But there's 1,800 illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries you'll get from radiation, not just cancer. Doctors near Tokyo attribute the symptoms to radiation exposure, increased nosebleeds, stubborn cases of diarrhea, and coronavirus-like symptoms in children. Really? If you leave the children in a nuclear wasteland and shit happens to them, go on, boy. What? Who would have thought that? Former official, Fukushima radiation is killing the children. Heart problems, leukemias, thyroids. Authorities are hiding the truth from the world. We need to admit people are dying, but we're not allowed to say it. It's okay, we got your 6, man. When you're using a Geiger counter in a child's classroom, trying to make up, because you're on a fence about is it too much radiation or not, it's too much radiation, okay? If you put TEPCO in that same school, they would punch you in the head trying to get out of there. Many young people in Fukushima or in high school have died suddenly. Ignore all the problems, the former mayor says. People are always told any disease they have is not caused by radiation. Man from Fukushima chokes up. The children are radioactive. People are in denial. Yeah, when you're growing food with ongoing nuclear meltdowns in a nuclear wasteland, you are definitely a moron or a murderer. You're definitely the double M minimum. UN, United Nations, a corporation like Walmart and McDonald's, chairman, studying Fukushima radiation impact. Studying it. Well, we're looking into it. We'll give you... We wouldn't expect to see health effects in children, workers, or anybody else. Really? I had multiple nuclear meltdowns. No, they're going to be fine. I got to fly off to Geneva. Have a nice day, morons. And you pick up 60 million one-ton bags, use up all the rubber in half the planet. Yeah, there's something going on. People inhale up to 85,000 becquerels of radioactivity in just 4 hours. They're only including the iodine 131. There's 10 times more iodine 132, 30 times more 133, 30 times more iodine 129. And the iodine 132, 133 is 9 times more effective at ionizing and radiating your thyroid glands than the iodine 131, which is unbelievably effective. And that's applicable to animals and insects and birds and animals and mammals and blah. Radioactive iodine found in 50% of the children up to 35 millisieverts, which is 35,000 microsieverts. These are absurd numbers, but the meters are always in unisieverts. To do that, right, to disarm the population, to get them to stay there so they can study the human lab rats. It's despicable. It's criminal, really. It really is what they're doing. And they never waste a crisis with the nuclear industry. They took advantage of it, got children now as legitimate lab rats they can study for generations. Impossible High World Health Organization initial report estimated Tokyo and Osaka infant thyroid doses of 10 to 100 millisieverts, which is 10,000 to 100,000 microsieverts, and up to a full sievert in Nami. 5 sieverts is considered a lethal dose right away. So getting 1 sievert dose in Nami, you're not supposed to. They abandoned Nami after that, of course, because of that. But then they moved people back in a couple of years ago. Well, victims who don't put their fate in the industry. Almost 100,000 Fukushima kids with thyroid tumors. There's no such thing as thyroid problems, it's thyroid tumors, because that's what's going on. It's under siege from your body trying to build a tumor around it for decades, if that's what it takes, right? Your thyroid takes the radiation and turns it into a mutated radioactive hormone, right through the thyroid glands. Tokyo drinking water unsafe for infants. That's crazy. Then it's always unsafe. When you see pictures like that of radiation and abandoned communities, it's prudent and important, on top of that, not to eat food from this place. Study finds 12 millisieverts, 12,000 microsievert average doses of internal radiation in Fukushima children. The government assured the levels of such doses were 0, and they won't notify the parents who keep feeding the radioactive food. It never goes away, right? Hence the numbers I showed you earlier. We need outside help. The Japanese people are not listening. We are now in bad condition, especially for children. Please help. Indeed. Nuclear radiation, by the way, is the most carcinogenic thing that exists, period. France says Japan has lost the country. Control and French will leave the country. Don't worry, they'll ship the food to you. Swiss embassy evacuated Tokyo. Not Fukushima, but Tokyo. Over 200 kilometers away. Fearing radiation. Smiling mascots asked Fukushima kids to gargle to stay safe from radiation, which obviously that doesn't work, right? And this was some of the depictions they were using. Now go back to school. When you take a picture of these overexposed picture, you see the radiation showing up in it. It's absurd. It's just incredible contempt for children, the nuclear industry. We see this all the time. Children playing in front of a Geiger counter. Nobody a decade ago could have convinced me that we'd see that day. Go on, Hollywood wouldn't even dream that up. But instead, yeah, it's real. Inhaling just one radioactive particle can cause a cancer. Gee, what if I eat it, Dana? It's the same thing. There's no such thing as a stupid question when it comes to radiation, by the way. 179 microsieverts per hour at an elementary school. Hot spots at bus stops, main gate, schoolyard, pool, gym. That's the places where the kids hang out, isn't it, Dana? Yeah. Lecturer tells parents Tokyo radiation not so serious. Let kids play outside. I don't let my kid go outside. It's a nuclear wasteland. And the people who kept their kids indoors done the right thing. Why would you eat food from Japan? Do you know where that water goes? It goes to the next rice field and the next rice field and the next rice fields, all the way down to the coastline, to the fish, whatever's left. Kids run marathons on radioactive streets. The children of Fukushima will be killed by the government. Yeah, that's correct. Well, they'll figure it out a way to kill you at some point. It shows that a single particle atom causes a tumor in the lung, and then it manifests eventually and metastasizes throughout the whole body. You can't eat anything from a nuclear wasteland. You can't move back into a nuclear wasteland just because you took some of these bags out. The bags, the 60 million one-ton bags, are from 3% of the land and farmland and communities where they want people to move back in to give, so the nuclear industry doesn't look like the monster that it is. See? Oh no, see, people moved in there, it's safe, right? But that's just a PR campaign. IAEA today admitted there's no such thing as a safe level of radiation, hence the reason people ran away and left their incredibly prosperous life behind. SOS from local official, can't take it anymore. Black dust over 5.5 million becquerels, not unisieverts, not microsieverts, not millisievers, but becquerels, atomic decays per second, atoms floating around, pulsing energy every second. You see these black bags in farmland? That should terrify you because that's going to end up in your supermarket. High internal radiation exposure detected in young children. 16 people with internal exposures over a millisievert. And we've seen them earlier up to 100,000 millisieverts. 230,000 becquerels. These are absurd numbers per square meter of just gamma on athlete fields in Kodo, which is right by Tokyo, 6 times as high as the limits for the radiation control areas. It's this type of pictures, though. There's quite a few of them. Freaks me right out. That why would you grow food across from a nuclear dump, and why would you harvest it? Why? Oh my goodness, why? Now this was the media published a photo saying people are wrong to accuse that food of being radioactive. That's Japan government. 10 million becquerels a kilogram of cesium detected in minima soma soil samples. 10 million becquerels a kilogram multiplied by 68. Multiplied by 68 to get the square meter where your children would stand up in that community. These are this is terrorism, couldn't even pull that off. And then they never stopped growing food, right? And they never picked up a bag till about 2 years later. I feel as if we're being killed slowly. I want everyone in the world to know we are living in constant fear, and this is an infringement of human rights. It is too. And when you ship this food worldwide, that's murder, 100% murder. 5 million becquerels a kilogram, no decontamination. We can't eat the food grown here, but we're forced to live here. Yeah, this nuclear industry, the worldwide nuclear industry, like the whole world nuclear industry never sent any help from any nuclear power plants worldwide to Fukushima. No volunteers from power plants worldwide to go to nuclear. Real mystery black substances. This is minima soma, if I remember correctly. 20 million becquerels a kilogram of just gamma. It's absurd numbers. Every time it rains, it's going to be radioactive for 1 million years there. It's still melting down, remember? There was also a storage facility with 1,800 pounds of uranium that caught fire and blew up. So there's many of these emissions from Japan. There was many things we're not aware of, might never find out about, that were lost during that tsunami. Areas in Fukushima were recontaminated within 24 hours of being cleaned up. Will have to be permanently evacuated. Yeah, so they go through the forest and they pick up a bit of debris, and then they call it cleaned up. 4,000 becquerels a kilogram in the fog. That's deadly fog. That's just the most terrifying, absurd in Tokyo. That's the most terrifying headline imaginable for anywhere on the planet, except for Tokyo. Apparently that's acceptable, is it? Reactor 3 doesn't exist anymore. It's the mixed oxide fuel. This is why these communities are abandoned. And look at all the homeless and destitute, the victims of society, the immigrants who don't speak the language, that they got there to clean it up, to trick people into going back. You can't clean it up is the problem. You can pick up whatever you see there, but you're using paper suits on top of that. Tokyo neighbor cesium approaching levels found in Fukushima Chiba dust. We covered that one earlier, actually. So you can't check the food for radiation without checking for gamma, alpha, neutrons, and betas. And so my Geiger counter is only going to look for some gamma, right? And I'm finding way too many to be comfortable about it. So my Geiger counter won't find that. We had 20 million iodine 131 atoms showed up, but my Geiger counter didn't display that. You know what I mean? You need scientific gear, $50,000 Geiger counters to do it. These are absurd numbers after rainfall. Just because the food grows there don't mean it's safe. It's going to taste great, but it's not. Why do that to yourself? Fukushima will start burning radioactive waste 100,000 becquerels a kilogram. 100 becquerels a kilogram of cesium is nuclear waste pre-Fukushima. After, it's considered safe. Well, it never was and never will be. That's the bunch of nuclear industry changed it and then wants you to accept being poisoned so that their industry can murder everything else on the planet is a mistake, and I'm not going to sit in silence. They found plutonium in every sample. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And you can only pick up 3% of a small percentage of the land. It's not remediation, no matter how you spin it. Fukushima is a new blueprint for terrorism. All you got to do is cut off power. All you got to do is cut off the power. So when you see all the media pretending they're in a building, a nuclear reactor that had melted down, pretending they're in that reactor on mainstream TV worldwide, nobody challenges that narrative. Doesn't that make you wonder? If not, I probably can't help you. But over the years, you can guarantee, like I do target policymakers and investors and decision makers, and that are not in the know, have drinking the Kool-Aid and think they know, but if they come across my material, they're going to be like, oh, didn't know none of that. No one's ever told me that before. Oh my goodness. I honestly believe the world, the average person, if you present them with the documentation, the average person could work it out. How are we doing the poll tonight? How do we do on the poll tonight? Way to poll. 93% to 43 votes says pro-nuclear power people should be labeled a death cult. That's really cool. I appreciate that. That was mighty, mighty nice of you. Yeah, coconut oil, coconut water, coconut milk, stuff like that is actually good for you. Don't get it from radioactive places, but hope everybody's doing well. So we got a big snowstorm gonna come in and pummel here in about 36, 48 hours or something. And it's going to get around 40 centimeters, and the wind's going to be blowing around 70 kilometers. So we're definitely going to get a good pummeling. I moved the trailers today in the boat, and tomorrow I got to wrap the trailer up in the tarp so the snow doesn't pull up on it, right? It's still going to be a miserable day tomorrow. And I got to fix up the shed a bit so the snow doesn't blow up under it. So a lot of work ahead of me tomorrow. And today was blowing almost 100 kilometers. But I had to get ahead of this thing because I didn't see the bad weather coming. And here it is. Okay, well, thanks everybody. Have a great night. Do a quick shout out. Why not? Andres Moto, Dave Holly, P. Swear, James Mangan. How come I keep smurfing up your name, man? Port Angeles, Honey Sir, One King. James Lucid. Good night, everybody. PBS Lover. Dana Nasana. Good night, folks. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. Ella. Anyway. The bog. It's a lot of work today. I changed my mind a couple of times today trying to tell this story. There is no simple way to tell the story, right? You got to have the evidence all the time at your fingertips, which is what I bring to the table. Mike Mansfield, Ella. Seen the trolls were hounding me earlier. It used to be madness, hey, with the trolls years ago. It was savage. There was 2,000 of them from Taiwan, from the nuclear university, came out in the media a few years ago. 2,000 nuclear students from Taiwan spammed the internet for the first couple of years after Fukushima. Tropics. I almost threw the names there. We'll call her tonight. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if that's possible. Put in your bookmarks so you can find me later. Sea Rain. Ooh, almost done. I'll turn it down. It's distracting me tonight for some reason. Normally I like the music at the end of it. And then I do a quick shout out to people in the comments section as a way it helps me switch off, because I still got a lot of work once the show is over. I got to get ready for tomorrow night then. It's a brutal routine. It's a brutal pace that I got put on. We're now like 3,300 nuclear stories behind. That's brutal, right? There's a big push on this year for nuclear because renewables in the last 2 years, the 633 nuclear power plants where the renewables came online in less than 24 months. This year was 333 nuclear power plants where renewables came online. Nuclear is irrelevant, right? But they're not going to go down without a chicken neck fight. Probably missed a few people because I'm squinting tonight for some reason. I'll come down to the last comments. We'll call it a night. Sean Webb, Tim Norris. Yeah, I hear you. Good night, everybody. Colette S. I call it. Robert, Chad. Thanks, everybody. God bless everybody. Hopes for everybody. That was a really good show tonight. Because last night I switched off. We just covered news only instead of bringing endless information. I didn't like doing that, by the way, but I'd never done a show like that before. So, I don't know. What should be the poll for these people? We should have a poll. Should these people something. Okay, good night, everybody. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. I got so much work tomorrow. It makes me sick just thinking about it. It's going to be blowing 30 with 50-kilometer gust. I got to get the tarp on the boat. You're 13 feet up in the air on the boat, right? We're going to get 40 centimeters of snow blowing at 70 kilometers an hour. It's going to pile up high, man. It's going to be ugly on Thursday. So I only got tomorrow to make it happen. I'm burnt out. Anyway, we'll see everybody tomorrow night. Have a great night. Let's take care, folks.